What if I told you there's a crucial layer of American history that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time? We're talking about a private group, a fraternity really, that had this massive, often overlooked role in building the entire nation. So today, we're going to dive into the story of Freemasonry in the United States and uncover its influence from the highest halls of power all the way out to the rugged frontier.
So let's just kick things off with this really bold claim from our source material, Gould's History of Freemasonry. It basically argues that Masonic ideals were actually more important in shaping North America than the famous wars we all learn about in school. I mean, that's a huge statement, right? So what's the evidence for something like that? Let's take a look.
Okay, so our first stop is the Old South, and we're zeroing in on the brand new state of Alabama. This is where we can really see Freemasonry weaving itself right into the foundations of society and government. For the country's rising elite, it was like this private network built on trust and a shared set of values, an incredibly powerful tool for building a new world.
Get this. In 1821, just 2 years after Alabama even officially became a state, its Masonic Grand Lodge was up and running. And this wasn't some fringe group meeting in a basement. No, this was founded by the absolute who's who of early Alabama. We're talking about the civic and political elite.
And when I say elite, I really mean it. Just look at this list. You've got U.S. senators, governors like John Murphy and Israel Pickens, congressmen, judges, doctors. It's like the entire power structure of the new state was tied up with the fraternity from day one. It wasn't just part of the establishment. You could almost say it was the establishment.
So it's pretty clear the Masons were right at the heart of things. But what happens when all that secrecy and influence gets hit with a wave of suspicion and public outrage? Well, a huge national scandal was about to put the fraternity's strength to the ultimate test.
This whole crisis was called the Morgan Craze. It all started back in 1826, when a guy named William Morgan just vanished, supposedly because he was threatening to expose Masonic secrets. This sparked a nationwide panic, a kind of anti-Masonic hysteria. By 1829, that public clamor got so intense in Alabama that the Grand Lodge just shut down. It ceased all communications for 2 full years. It just went dark. And the backlash was absolutely severe. I mean, in that 1 year, 1829, 10 lodges in Alabama had to forfeit their charters. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but that was nearly a third of all the lodges in the entire state, just collapsing under the weight of all that public pressure.
But here's the thing. The fraternity survived. And as America started pushing westward, Masonry went right along with it. So now, let's head to a completely different scene. The rugged Arizona territory. We're talking the Wild West, where, grit and determination mattered a whole lot more than your social standing.
This quote, wow. This is from the application for Arizona's very first Masonic Lodge back in 1865. Just think about how these guys saw themselves. As an advance post of the army of civilization. They believed they were literally fighting to bring order to a chaotic, dangerous frontier. This was a totally different kind of Masonry, a pioneering force.
And believe me, this was not an exaggeration. Life out on the frontier was incredibly dangerous. These guys were dealing with constant threats from stagecoach robbers, and they were right in the middle of the Apache Wars. For them, just showing up for a lodge meeting could actually be a life-threatening trip.
And this little detail really tells you everything about their dedication. It's one of my favorite bits from the source. The Masons out in Globe, Arizona, couldn't get their hands on proper ceremonial jewels. So what do? The local tinsmith, who is also a Mason, just neatly cut them out of tin. It's just a perfect symbol of their resourcefulness and their absolute commitment to building something, no matter what they had to work with.
Okay, so they'd survived scandal and they'd helped settle the frontier. But now the fraternity was about to face its greatest trial ever, a nation literally tearing itself apart. So now we're turning to Arkansas to see how a brotherhood that was sworn to unity managed to get through the Civil War. The key figure we've got to look at here is a man named Elbert H. English. He was the Grand Master of Arkansas for the entire duration of the Civil War. And by reading his official speeches, you can actually trace this incredible emotional journey from fiery support for secession to a desperate call for healing.
The contrast here is just staggering. In 1861, English sounds like a passionate Confederate, praising Masons for picking up a sword to fight Lincoln. But fast forward to 1865, and his tone is completely different. He's talking about forgiveness, about throwing a broad mantle of Masonic charity over the mistakes of the past. It's a really clear attempt to use their brotherly bonds as a tool to try and stitch the country back together. And you really can't talk about Arkansas Masonry without mentioning the almost legendary Albert Pike. This guy was a Confederate general. He'd fought in a duel, and then he went on to become one of the most influential figures in the entire history of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. His life is just proof of how deeply these Masonic leaders were tangled up in the biggest events of the 19th century.
So, they navigated the halls of power, the frontier, and even a civil war. But what was the actual, tangible legacy of all this influence? To wrap this up, let's look at the concrete things that Masons actually built in American society.
This really brings us full circle to that big, bold claim we started with. See, these weren't just social clubs. In Arkansas, they started a major college before the state even had a public university. In Alabama, they built a home for widows and orphans. And out in Arizona, a tiny charity fund that started with just $175 grew into a massive resource for people in need. This was literally civic construction in action.
So, at the end of the day, whether you were in a state capitol building or a dusty frontier town, these Masonic principles and their networks were this constant, quiet force, truly deeply woven right into the fabric of the growing nation.
And all this kind of leads to a final thought. You know, the Freemasons are just one example of a powerful group working behind the scenes of what we read in history books. It really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? What other hidden architects have been quietly shaping our world all this time? Their stories just waiting to be told.